This is the Haulin Assets podcast where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome, everybody, to the Haulin Assets podcast. This is episode number 38. We're going over the January financials today. I am Craig, your host, and Chris.
How you doing, Craig?
Not bad. You are, not only are you live and in the flesh here in the studio, as is becoming less and less normal these days, but we have a live studio audience today.
Yeah, which I brought the riffraff.
I think that's jeer-worthy. Chris's family is with us today, just, peanut gallerying it up.
Yeah, wanted to see how the magic happens.
Yep. Anyway, so today we are going over the January financials, like I said. But before we do, let me remind you to go to Facebook and search Haulin Assets. Go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for the full show notes and links to anything that we talk about during these episodes, including the numbers that we're going to be going over. So Haulin Assets LLC for that, and we would love to hear from you in both of those places. All right, Chris, you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
So you sent me the numbers, at least you sent me a few of the numbers ahead of time, and it's pretty impressive. This is not what we were expecting to see coming off of an unfortunately weak December with, the truck being out of commission and all that. But January's looking pretty good.
January was actually our best month yet, and it shocked me.
Really? So
absolutely, because January,
for somebody who's so into his numbers, I figured nothing could shock you.
No, it shocked me because January usually tells off pretty hard. February gets even worse, and I just didn't see the drop off for January that normally happens in the industry. And I don't think I think it was in some ways kind of unique to me. I had some things that helped me out, got lucky on a few things. But January didn't, I don't think, drop for everybody quite as hard as it usually did. But for me, it actually was as good or better than any other month.
Now, this is maybe a little bit off the topic of what you sent over my way, but I'm curious if you think this has anything to do with the general economic numbers. Things are looking pretty nice these days. And so we don't have quite the drop off that we do after the holidays. Do you attribute any of that to the general economy, or is it something specific going on within trucking?
I think that plays into it a little bit, but I think part of it is I'm hoping that the market's kind of equalizing a little bit. We talked a few episodes back about how there were so many new trucks that entered the market in 2019,
right?
Really 2018, 2019, and I think they slowed down in 2019, adding new trucks. There are one big company that went out of business and a bunch of small companies that went out of business. And so I'm hoping that just is equalizing the demand a little bit. And, and in that kind of a situation, we're going to see some benefits on our end because of that kind of stuff.
Right. And, we had a couple of months where, we talk about these financials every month, and it seems like for 2 or 3 months in a row, it's been, well, it's not as good as we'd like, but that's why we prepare, right? And so we talked a lot about savings and being prepared for those unexpected expenditures and that sort of thing. But this is the kind of month where you have the opportunity to actually do that preparation. This is one of those, hey, we had a great month, and so you get to reinvest in the business, save, and all that stuff, right?
Which we need. We really needed January to be good like this because December, as we've already talked about, was bad because I was off the road for half the month with the truck broke down, and I'm going to be off the road for half the month in February because I've got military duty. And so, I would like to have been able to save some of this January money, but in reality, it's just going to help compensate some for December and then help push me through February. Just having the truck off the road for half the month, it's never that's never good for the numbers.
Right. Well, speaking of which, let's go ahead and get into the numbers then. I think we've let people sit long enough without hearing what they actually were. So let's dive into the highlights for January, Chris.
Okay. So there's a couple things in January that really kind of stick out that make this month a little bit different. One of the big things is I had a really big win in January. I got to haul my very first load directly for a shipper.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. You bet. Yeah, you were talking about that since before you ever hit the road at all.
Yeah, it's that's when you kind of jump into the next league, and this is just one. And to be honest with you, I kind of cheated a little bit.
Was it somebody you knew from before?
It was my father-in-law.
Oh, boo!
Yeah, so hauled a load for my father-in-law. He builds stainless steel restaurant equipment, and was had a job down in Texas that he had to haul for. And he let me haul it. He paid me just kind of what he's paid companies when he's had to do this in the past for, so I didn't get like any special treatment from him. But
other than getting the job,
getting the job,
but that's how it goes, right? It's as often what sort of connections you're able to get out there and make, and this one happened to be a pretty close one.
Yeah, so you take what you can get, and that's definitely one that we'll take it, and it's a good thing. He doesn't ship that often, so it's not like it's going to be able to be a constant thing, but I'll probably be able to haul some more for him. But you know what? That load actually made me more nervous than about any other load I've hauled.
Because it was family?
Yeah, it's family. You don't want to disappoint them. It's pretty expensive equipment in the back, and it's not one of those things like, if you've got a food product and you're hauling ice cream for somebody, it's not like you can just go back to the warehouse and get new ice cream. I mean, it takes months to build this stuff. And so you get in a crash and something gets damaged, and, it really kind of would put him out pretty bad. And so, that makes you nervous. You definitely don't want to disappoint family, but it all turned out. And plus I have to live with him. If I break his stuff, I got to see him Melanie makes me go hang out with them every now and again.
Well, I'm sure he's a lovely man.
I have great in-laws. I can't complain.
Okay. So would this being your first direct haul, would you be able to kind of leverage that into other things? Like, are you able to use him as a reference now, or is it just going to be kind of back to the drawing board, finding more direct loads?
It's probably going to be a more the latter, back to the drawing board, finding loads from other areas. There is a chance I could maybe get some loads from some of the other companies that he does business. Because usually what happens is he builds the restaurant equipment for somebody that goes in and installs it and kind of builds out the entire restaurant. Well, in this situation, the company had kind of piecemealed it, and he did his piece separate than from the main restaurant builders. And so usually it's the other guys that coordinate the transportation, not him. And so this is, kind of a one-off, happens once or twice a year.
So let's talk about what kind of effect that had then on your month, because that, as you've said in the past, that gets you some great rates when you're cutting out the middlemen in whatever capacity they show up, right? So if it's a direct haul, then you're probably getting a better rate than you usually did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're getting, in this kind of situation, I'm probably getting, I got about maybe 25 cents a mile than, my average load. Plus it was a dry load, so I wasn't running my reefer the whole time.
Oh, nice.
And it just, it worked out really well timing wise. Everything was pretty smooth with it. And so it was a really good paying load.
Good. And were you able to get out on the road as much as you wanted to on the whole?
Yeah, January,
outside of just this one load?
Actually, January ended up being like a pretty good month. I kind of looked at it. I did a lot. I did that load. I did a load that I started out in December, and the last half coming back from the Atlanta area back to Utah, actually up into Washington, all on one load. And then after that, it was the load to Dallas and back, and then a bunch of loads between the Salt Lake area and up into the Northwest. So a couple to Portland, a couple to the Seattle, Tacoma area of Washington. And they were actually really pretty decent paying loads, picking up onions and some other fruit stuff coming back. And so, all of that just kind of added up and were good loads. And we'll see that as we kind of go through the numbers here.
Nice. Okay, so let's get into those numbers then. Well, I mean, I already said that, but let's dive into the mileage and those kind of specifics now.
Yeah, so the total mileage that I ran was 9,629 miles, which really is kind of on the lower end.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We're usually up into the above 10,000 for sure, even approaching 12,000, so a few thousand less miles than normal. The other thing that kind of really stuck out on this one was my Deadhead Miles. The Deadhead Miles were actually completely out of control, which you would think would
kill your month.
It would kill the month, but so the Deadhead Miles were 1,188 miles, so way over 10%.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, what's that, 15 almost?
Probably pretty close to 15. I haven't done the math, but
Well, yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to do the math in my head.
Close to that. We'll just call it that. Call it good. Close enough. But regardless, it's it was a bad month for Deadhead. But I was able to work those extra Deadhead miles. A lot of them. There were a couple loads that I took we're at a Deadhead from Salt Lake up into Idaho, and then go on to Washington. I was kind of able to work in a little bit better fee, because a lot of those places, there's not enough trucks in those areas, and so they have to get somebody to Deadhead from like Salt Lake and get up there, and so they'll oftentimes
they're going to comp you with a better rate.
Yeah, they don't totally compensate for all those Deadhead miles, but they do some, and in the end, it worked out because the total revenue for the month was $21,470, which isn't the highest total revenue, but pretty close. Definitely up there in the near the top. But the thing that was really awesome was my all-in rate per mile, which was $2.23 a mile, and that includes the Deadhead. So
that's I'm trying to remember back on previous months, but that blows your previous record out of the water, doesn't it?
I think the previous record was just over $2, but we're usually closer to like $1.80, $1.90, kind of depending on the time of year. But yeah, so it really does crush it.
Wow. Okay. All right. So,
and I wasn't even on the road all that much. 11 full days on the road and 11 partial days. So I actually, my wife won't agree with this, but got a little bit more home time than normal in January.
It's still even if it didn't feel like it.
Still not enough.
We just need to break the truck down every once in a while, get you home more often.
Yeah, no.
So, all right. So you ran fewer miles total, more Deadhead miles, but your rate was so good at $2.23 per mile that it made for a pretty good month, right? What was your total? You said your total revenue was $21,470. What does that bring your profit to for the month?
So the total profit after all the expenses, including my wage as a driver, was $4,516.85.
So that's profit for the business, not including what you were able to pocket.
Yep, that's profit, not including what I took as a driver. And if you look at the P&L, let's see, I paid myself as the driver pay was $4,600.
Nice. Okay. All right. So you and the business were making pretty close to the same amount of money in January.
Did, yeah.
Nice.
If you add the two together, a little over $9,000 for the month.
All right.
So, as an owner operator, I mean, that's not too bad. And that even includes, there was my maintenance expense was kind of high for the month, but repairs was low. So they kind of, on average, if you add those two together, a pretty normal month, right about kind of where things should be. So, even after all those repairs, the truck payment, everything else, as an owner operator, taking home $9,000 in a month is not bad.
Yeah, and when I think of your driver rate, what you're making on these miles, let's see, that translates to a little over $50,000 a year. I'm just putting it in terms I can understand. I always think on a yearly basis when it comes to your wage. And, the business, that's going to fluctuate. I guess you and the business would fluctuate depending on the number of miles you're running. So,
yeah. I can't remember exactly, 9,000 times 12, 118.
118. So
118. Yeah. So, that's a pretty good wage. I'd make $118,000 in a year.
Nice. Okay.
And obviously we aren't doing this every month.
A lot of that's going back into the business though, right? That's not the wage you're making.
No, but you could. As an owner operator, because theoretically the money that's going back into the business is about normal of what it should be. So we spent $1,400 in maintenance and a little over $150 in repairs. So overall in the month, when you add kind of maintenance and repairs together, it was about $1,500, which should be roughly about normal for a month in those two categories. So it was really a bland month overall, but it's kind of what typically it should be. And on top of that, you start factoring in, we're still, I don't think, near the peak of what we should be able to get overall rate wise. It was a good rate. But as we start to develop more and more direct shipper relationships, we're going to start seeing that rate more and more. And we'll actually, at the end of the podcast episode, once we get through kind of some of the other things I want to talk about, the P&L and the balance sheet, we'll retouch on that and talk a little bit about, what getting those relationships with direct shippers mean.
Okay, well, let's dig into the P&L then. Where do you want to start on that?
Well, we've actually covered most of what I wanted to talk about. The one thing that still kind of sticks out that's a little bit unusual in this P&L that we haven't seen so much in the past, as I mentioned that I've held quite a few loads up into Washington and Oregon. Well, when you go into Washington, you go through Oregon. I think we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but Oregon charges you, they don't do a fuel tax like every other state in the country, but they charge you 21 cents a mile to drive in Oregon.
Wow.
Which is just crazy. And I put 2,300 miles in Oregon.
Wow.
That month. So my Oregon permit
that's got to be $400 or $500 right there.
$563.32.
Wow.
So that's still, that profit that we were talking about is still after all that money that we paid to Oregon and the permit. And the other thing that I did in January in the past, I have always there's two ways you can pay that fee. You can, anytime you go into the state, you tell them where in Oregon you're going to go and where you're going to come out from, and they will calculate it and you pay that money up front. Or you can get an annual permit, but you have to file a bond to do that. It's a $2,000 bond. And most guys don't like to do that. At some point, if you go into Oregon enough, they force you to do it. And I was getting kind of on that cusp where I have gone in enough that they were probably going to start forcing me to do it. So I think back in November, so I had applied for the Oregon permit, got it. And it really, honestly, it makes your life 10 times easier because you don't waste so much time on the phone getting the permit. You get charged like an extra $8 every time you buy the permit individually. And then the other thing that makes it really nice is it pairs with pre-pass. And Oregon doesn't use pre-pass, but they have another thing called green light that the pre-pass transponder can work with. And so I think since I got that permit, I've only been stopped at one Oregon scale instead of being pulled into the Oregon scales every time I pass through. And so that saved me a ton of time and just, made life a lot easier and more convenient. So if you're going to put any kind of miles into Oregon, I think that that $2,000 bond's worth it because you only have to, if you file on time for a year, they'll pay you the $2,000 back. So it's not a permanent bond. It's just for that first year. Once they trust you that you're going to pay those fees on time like you're supposed to, they give it back.
Oh, interesting. All right. What else from the P&L you want to dig into? Anything else?
Just let's reiterate that $4,500.
You want to dwell on that a little bit.
Let's talk about the wins.
All right, sounds good.
It's a good month.
So $4,500, and what are you going to end up doing with that? Obviously, we talk a lot about savings here, preparedness, and all of that.
That's really what it boils down to. Well, I'm going to just keep all that money in the companies, again, to kind of help cover for February, because February was such is going to be a tough month because of my 2 weeks out for the military. But let's move on to the balance sheet and talk a little bit about the balance sheet. There's really not a ton different here, other than one thing that I really want to kind of dive into. I started the process for doing my taxes for 2019. And so my accountant has gone in and made some adjustments in my accounting system for 2019. And mainly the big one is the depreciation expense. And so you're not going to see it on this balance sheet by itself, but what you will see on the balance sheet is the retained earnings. So the retained earnings is basically how much money you've made or lost in the previous years, and it shows up on the balance sheet. So if you look at the numbers at the end of December, you'll show a net profit. But then you look at this one in January, they've added the depreciation expense on the truck into the 2019 numbers, and it's affected this retained earnings on the balance sheet. And you went from roughly, I think, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, a $5,000 profit in 2019 to a $9,000 loss. Oh, so wow. It's almost a $15,000 swing. But the good thing about that is that depreciation expense is not an expense that's a cash expense. So it's not like you're actually putting money out.
Right.
But you get to recognize that it's basically the truck and the trailer, the depreciation on those two assets. And so you get to recognize that as a loss. And so that helps you tax wise. So now instead of showing income of $5,000 for the year, I show a loss of $9,000 a year. So I'm not paying taxes on that $5,000 that I made. And I'm actually it's like almost like getting a tax credit. It's like basically the same thing as your interest write-off on your home mortgage. It works the same way. That's going to be $9,000 of income that I'm not going to have to account for and pay taxes on.
Oh man, you know what? All right, kids out there, everybody get a good accountant, because frankly, that sounds like wizardry to me. But somebody's got to do it.
Yeah,
that's great.
It is in some ways, but that's one of the benefits of business ownership that you don't get as an employee. You get, those kind of depreciation expenses, and that's going to help my taxes a little bit and make it so I pay a little bit less in taxes this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, very good. Well, what else do we want to call out before we hit the road here, Chris?
Let's just kind of reiterate some of the things that we saw happen in January that really made this a good month. So one, hauling the direct load for my father-in-law, the shipper, that I cheated a little bit on. that made things really good. And then just, we kind of, to a certain extent, got a little bit lucky that freight was doing really, really well in January, going up into the Northwest, so the Oregon, Washington area. And I really got kind of lucky on some backhauls. I got some good paying backhauls that I kind of wasn't expecting. The one coming out of Dallas back to Utah actually paid higher than I was thinking I was going to get, and there were a few of the loads coming from the Northwest back into Utah that paid a lot better than I expected. And sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some, and we won a little bit more in January, and it just really helped make January a lot better.
Very good. Well, I'm glad to hear that it went so well. And like I was saying earlier, we talk a lot about being prepared, and these are the kind of months where you get to actually put that into practice, not taking stuff out, not taking out of your preparedness bank, but putting something into it, right?
Absolutely. And you know what else it's done is it's kind of motivated me more, just, kind of finally being able to see and experience how those better rates really make a big difference, make life better. Lower number of miles, better profit, less wear and tear on the truck. It made for a really good month. It's motivated me to go out and find more of those direct shipper relationships. And, you see a lot on trucking forums, especially forums that deal with owner operators. You see this big gap between the guys that say owner operator is the worst thing you could ever do, just stay an employee, to the guys who say owner operator is the best thing they ever done. They like it. And I think that big difference is the difference between the guys who only find their loads on brokers. From brokers. They're going to be the ones that say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, because it's really hard to get ahead if that's all you do. If you get all of your loads from brokers, especially if you're jumping around from one broker to the next, you're not establishing a relationship with a broker who will trust you and give you his better freight. To, on the other side of the spectrum, the guys who are able to get the relationships with shippers and get those higher paying loads are the ones that say, being an owner operator is the best thing that ever happened to me. So it just reemphasizes that if you really truly want to be successful as an owner operator, you've got to develop those relationships, ideally with shippers, but even just developing a relationship with a broker who's going to trust you and give you his better paying freight, because it's the freight that he has to count on you delivering on time and doing a good job with. You get those kind of relationships, and it's the difference between being mediocre and being great. Yeah.
Well, luckily in January, things went pretty great, and hopefully that continues. And we will be back this time next month with our February numbers. We'll see what happens there, especially with your 2 weeks at Army National Guard training. I say my words, Army National Guard training. And I'm sure there will be plenty else to talk about in the intervening weeks. So, Chris, anything else before we head out?
I think that kind of wraps it up.
All right, very good. Well, appreciate everybody listening. Hopefully you glean something. If you're paying good attention during these monthly financials episodes, there really is quite a lot to glean out of this, especially as we start to piece together the story of the first year of Haulin Assets. Each month may be, more or less interesting or useful or whatever. But as every month we get these financials episodes, I'm starting to see some pretty interesting patterns. And I think we're going to have fun putting it all together when we get to the end of your first year on the road.
Absolutely. It'll be fun to share the whole year's worth of experience for sure.
Good. So let us know what you think over at Facebook and at HaulinAssetsLLC.com. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Say hi to everybody. Say bye.
Hi. Bye.
That's Hanley.
Okay. I'm looking good over here. All right. And now that I've hit puberty, I think we're ready to start.
Hey, that needs to go in the outtakes at the end.
Yeah, we'll see about that.